The table stretched long under the chandelier plates lined like trophies, every eye waiting to score me. Aunt Pat leaned close as she set a napkin in front of me. Crimson, folded with exact creases, it landed on the wood like a marker. The same shade as the ribbon I had hidden away in my duffel. My pulse caught for half a second, then smoothed into something quieter, something only I noticed. Thanksgiving weekend always turned this dining room into theater. Oak walls reflected candlelight portraits of ancestors loomed above like judges, and my mother's polished silver gleamed sharper than knives. Every detail had been perfected, every corner of the house rehearsed for admiration. Yet when I sat down, the perfection tilted. Pat fussed about the seating Ethan next to father so they could talk business, Caleb across from mother so she could praise his new venture. My chair was left near the edge as though a soldier belonged at the fringe, not at the center of success. Mother's voice floated across the table, smooth and precise. Ethan just got his promotion, you know. Regional lead 4 states under his watch. Isn't that impressive? She didn't glance at me. She didn't need to. The message was set for contrast. Father nodded already, pouring more wine into Ethan's glass. That's real progress, he said, his tone warm, carrying a weight he rarely offered me. Then he turned toward Caleb, who beamed like a startup poster child. And your pitch to those investors, how did it go? Caleb launched into jargon about burn rates and market expansion, every syllable applauded with polite laughter. Forks tapped glasses lifted a rhythm of validation that skipped when it came my turn. The silence after their stories was not complete. It hummed with unspoken judgment. Someone near the end muttered low enough to seem like air but sharp enough to pierce. Still just a soldier. I kept my eyes on the table. I had learned that reacting fed them more than silence. Yet Chloe, my cousin, with her restless fingers, had her phone angled toward me. Her camera lens lingered, not hidden, not blatant, just enough to let me know I was being watched, documented. Dinner carried on in practiced beats, but the pauses around me thickened. The smell of roasted turkey and cloves clung to the air, almost choking, as if flavor could replace what no one dared to say aloud. Father's glass stilled against the table. He studied me the way he used to examine quarterly reports, searching for flaws hidden between numbers. Then he said it, not a question, not a statement, but something suspended in between. You still keep that thing. The words fell, heavy, half-formed, leaving space for everyone's imagination to finish them. I felt the napkin under my hand, its red glow more vivid now, a quiet reminder of what I carried unseen. I stare at the red napkin, realizing the night will not stay polite. Every laugh at that table carried decimals, like my life was being graded in absentia. The second course arrived, bowls passed, glasses topped with another measure of wine. The oak-paneled room warmed under the fire's glow, but the heat never reached me. Each sip and chuckle slid into a ledger I could not see, where my balance always came up short. Ethan leaned back, the stem of his glass dangling like an accessory. Did you catch Forbes this week? He asked, aiming the question at no one in particular. Benji Tran from my MBA cohort, he's now the youngest CEO to take a logistics company public. Primetime interview, full spread. His voice thickened with pride, not for the man but for proximity to him. Mother lit up. Of course I saw it. That's what dedication looks like. He's barely 35 and already shaping markets. Such ambition should be celebrated. Her words were polished steel glowing in the firelight. They rang as if meant to carve something away from me without naming it. Caleb, quieter, pushed food around his plate with thoughtfulness but said nothing. His eyes shifted between me and Ethan, measuring, perhaps noticing what others pretended not to. I focused on the grain of the table. It carried small scars from years of family meals, scratches hidden under polish. Tonight, it felt more like a scoreboard, the marks aligning against me. Ethan wasn't finished. He used to sit 2 rows over. We pulled all-nighters together, case studies, market modeling. Now look, ringing the bell at NASDAQ. That's what happens when you're in the right circles. He tapped the rim of his glass against the table. Connections matter more than anything else. Father hummed approval. That's reality. You either build capital or you're consumed by it. He didn't look at me, but the air carried implication enough. I caught Chloe glancing at me, then at her phone, then back. She shifted in her chair, restless under the hierarchy pressing down. Finally, she spoke, her voice thin but clear. Alex was on that defense webinar last spring, remember? Hundreds of officers logged in. The Pentagon even cited Chloe. Mother's interruption cut the air clean. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Don't exaggerate, that's nothing. Those talks are routine like faculty meetings. No comparison to what your brother's classmates are accomplishing in finance. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin, a gesture so precise it seemed rehearsed. The fire cracked, punctuating the dismissal. Ethan smirked faintly into his glass. Caleb's fork paused, but he stayed silent, unwilling to step into crossfire. I swallowed water, not wine, because clarity mattered more than comfort. My tongue tasted iron, whether from the rim of the glass or something rising in my chest I couldn't tell. The room resumed chatter as though Chloe's attempt had been a blip erased from the record. But I heard it echo. My service compressed into nothing. My years under desert sun, the weight of brothers lost in firefights, the late nights writing briefings for leaders who never saw the field. Erased in a heartbeat in the name of financial benchmarks. I leaned forward steady enough that the movement felt deliberate, not reactive. Words formed before doubt could choke them. Business cards don't save lives in a firefight. The statement landed with the weight of a slammed gavel. Forks froze. The fire hissed. For one taut second, no one breathed. The silence after my line feels like a crack in polished wood. The glow of her phone was sharper than any knife on the table. Dessert plates appeared in parade fashion, pecan pie wedges crowned with whipped cream crust cracking under silver forks. Wine glasses smudged with fingerprints caught the chandelier's shimmer. A fog of indulgence blurred the room, but beneath it whispers brewed hotter than coffee, cooling in porcelain cups. Chloe shifted in her chair, shoulders hunched as though she were texting a friend. In reality, the black mirror of her phone angled slyly toward me. I caught the reflection, a sliver of my uniform jacket, a slice of my jawline. The pretense was thin. She aimed as though cataloging something more valuable than dessert. Phones down. Linda snapped suddenly, the edge in her voice slicing through the pie's sweet perfume. Her posture never broke, chin still high, pearls catching the light. But her eyes drilled into Chloe with maternal authority sharpened by fear. Chloe didn't flinch. She drew her spoon slowly through the pie, feigning innocence, then tilted the phone so the glow struck the table like a spotlight. A single tap. Sound spilled into the room. Caleb's voice, younger, clearer, recorded from months before Ghost Lead carried us through that operation. I'd follow them into any fire. The name detonated like a code word pulled from classified pages. Glasses stilled. Forks paused in mid-cut. Aunt Pat's hand froze above the cream dish. Ethan frowned, trying to place the phrase. Linda's face drained of color faster than the wine draining from her glass. "Where did you get that?" She hissed, her words fork-tined, meant for Chloe, but slicing the air for all of us. Chloe leaned back, unafraid now, her eyes bright with rebellion that had found a stage. It was online once. School forum. Caleb never thought anyone cared. Caleb's knuckles whitened around his spoon. "Delete that," he muttered, voice brittle. His complexion betrayed him, pale, cracking under the exposure. He couldn't deny what had been spoken, not with the proof humming from Chloe's phone speaker. Ethan shifted in discomfort. "Ghost, what, some game?" His laugh tried to smooth the tension, but caught halfway, collapsing under the silence. I sat still, pie untouched. My chest tightened as the word curled into the oak rafters above. Ghost Lead never meant for this table, never meant for family ears. It was a name tied to dust-streaked nights' radios sputtering static, and men depending on me to cut through chaos. To hear it here beneath chandelier light stripped it of its secrecy but sharpened its meaning. Linda recovered her voice, but it was thinner-pitched, higher. This isn't the place for truth. Chloe cut her off, her teenage defiance emboldened by the gasps she'd triggered. You celebrate Ethan's friends for ringing bells at NASDAQ. You call Alex nothing. But Caleb called him ghost lead. She repeated the phrase like a verdict. Caleb's fork clattered against porcelain, a metallic cry that rang louder than words. He looked at me, apology and betrayal knotted in his throat. Linda's palm pressed flat to the table as if to steady the whole house. Enough. But her command faltered. Even Aunt Pat, usually the peacemaker, couldn't supply a bridge. She sat rigid, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting between Chloe and me. The air vibrated with something unspoken. Every eye, even Ethan's, now turned in my direction, not with ridicule, but with a question they'd never dared to form. Ghost lead. The words whispered across their faces like smoke. My hand lifted almost without intention. A spoon hovered above the pecan pie, catching light on its polished surface, trembling not from weakness but from restraint. My spoon hovers midair. The room knows too much now. I remembered sand scraping my mask, the desert swallowing my voice. The night had no edges out there, only the hiss of grit against metal and skin. Wind filled the seams of my gear until even my heartbeat sounded like static. Through the lenses, everything was grain and shadow. Our squad crouched in a shallow fold that pretended to be cover. The radio coughed once, then flattened. A clipped order bled through hold position. Hold meant wait. Wait meant be found. Breathing through the filter, I tasted minerals and heat. Sand needled the soft places under the collar, under the gloves, at the hinge of the jaw. To my right, Alvarez tapped his magazine twice. To my left, Dixon's shoulders shook with a stifled cough. Far-off headlights skimmed the dunes like knives searching for reflection. Protocol wanted us small and still. The textbook loved grids more than men. I raised my fist, then pointed east through a trough that would cut their sightline and buy us seconds. We slid on knees and elbows, rifles low. The storm lent us its veil. Every whisper of sand erased what we had been a breath before. Behind us, the place we'd occupied moments earlier filled with light that found only emptiness. Their scan is shallow. Mason breathed through the net words, barely a thread. We move now, I said. Not to argue with command, but to keep my people breathing. We cut south and tucked into dead ground where the wind pooled instead of clawed. I counted to 20, time stretched thin as wire. The trucks drifted past beams, combing empty air. A burst of chatter crackled and died. The desert swallowed it. When quiet returned, it was the heavy kind that follows a bullet that never lands. We waited for dawn to lift the sky from black to iron to bone. Morning exposed what night had hidden tire tracks arcing away from the place we had not been, our own trail already sanding shut. We stood surfaces rasped raw but standing. I walked the line, palms to shoulders, counting by touch, because words felt wrong. The desert keeps secrets for those who move with it and takes everything from those who don't. Orders matter until they don't. Porcelain clinked. Chandelier hum replaced wind. Cinnamon edged the air. The dining room rushed back in one bright frame, silver winking glass catching flame faces posed. I realized my hand had tightened around the spoon. I set it down and looked at them as if the table were a map. If I hadn't broken the order, there'd only be sand left. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Across the table, Rick's knuckles blanched. The utensil he held knocked china and skittered to a stop. He looked at me the way a man looks at a ledger that has finally admitted it was wrong. Aunt Pat's mouth opened and closed. Ethan stared at the mantel as if answers might be engraved there. Caleb's eyes dropped to his plate. Chloe's screen went dark as she leaned into the truth like a window. Silence ripened. It wasn't approval, and it wasn't disbelief. It was a recalculation. The fire threw a shadow across the centerpiece that made the pears look like helmets half buried in dust. I could smell the faint, clean bite of polish under the sweet things. I remembered how relief has a weight you only feel when you set it down. Linda broke it with a small sound that pretended to be a laugh. Stories are easy. Results are what matter. She arranged her napkin with an unnecessary flourish, the kind of gesture you make when you want your hands to look occupied instead of empty. Her eyes searched the table for agreement. I didn't look away. Somewhere in the oak, a clock I could not see ticked once. I could feel the fine grit of memory under my tongue, the drag of fabric across a mask I wasn't wearing. I thought of headlamps sweeping a dune and finding nothing but their own light of men whose laughter still lives behind my eyes. I let all of it settle between us fine as dust. I meet her eyes and think she will force me to prove it. They raised their glasses to everyone but me, until the glass reflected a glint I knew too well. Candles had burned low collars of wax whitening the brass. Heat pooled above the dishes. Talk thinned into the kind of lull where people appraise rather than listen. My water caught the chandelier and shot a sliver of light across the napkin Aunt Pat set at my place, the same stubborn red that waited under my coat. Pat tried one more toast. To family. Polite chimes answered. I lifted my glass and watched the glint hop from rim to napkin and vanish beneath my lapel like a signal returning home. Linda cleared her throat with her editor's precision. We are grateful, she declared. Promotions, funding, stability. She let the last word sit like a verdict. Then, almost kindly, almost bored, a broke soldier at our table. What future is that? A soft laugh skittered. Forks stalled. Ethan smothered a grin. Caleb studied the grain as if it offered an exit. Pat touched her pearls, needing something to hold. I pushed back my chair. No rush, no speech. The coat slid from my shoulders, years traveling with fabric. I placed it over the chair. The chandelier did the rest. Light found the metal and walked it. Edge curve ribbon red answering red across the cloth. The room went still enough to hear wax drip. Somewhere a dish clicked and repented. Pat made a small sound she hadn't planned to make in public. Tears stood bright and disobedient. Oh, she said, startled by her own honesty. Rick froze as if a swell had lifted the floor. His fingers flattened along the knife. He'd asked once privately if I still kept that. Now the answer stared back. I didn't touch the metal. Leaving it alone felt truer than display. It belonged to rooms like this, and rooms lit by burning oil. It did not require me to explain it. Linda's face moved through surprise into calculation, and from calculation to brittle control. She reached for her glass and clipped the stem. Wine trembled. Symbols she managed are fine as far as they go. No symbol, I said. An accounting. Ethan tried for levity. Is it hard to get? He grimaced, hearing himself. Pat shook her head. You say get like it's a coupon, she murmured. The room had been measuring me all night with numbers that never fit. Now the math redrew itself. Rick's jaw loosened a notch. Caleb's shoulders tilted toward me before he stopped them as if his body had chosen a side. Linda set her glass down with ceremony. We're a family that values results. Plans, portfolios, deliverables. They call it broke. The nation calls it distinguished. Plain words, but the room made them large. Heat swelled. Memory rose sand against metal, a radio coughing to life, breath-counting men who were still breathing because someone moved first. For once, none of it fought the chandelier. It threaded through it. Pat reached across and took my hand. Not a plea. Gratitude without audience. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Rick let out a breath he hadn't admitted he was holding. His eyes traced the ribbon, then found mine. He wasn't asking for a story. He was amending one. A small nod passed between us, apology meeting respect, where words would have ruined it. Nobody told me to sit. Nobody toasted. The tribunal had ruled without a vote. Wax hardened at the mouths of the candles. The glaze on the plates turned dull. The house felt for once uncurated. Even Ethan's watch looked like jewelry again, not testimony. Linda tried professionalism. You can't run a life on sentiment. Or on hardware. It was the last tool she trusted. Nor on contempt, I said. Not sharp, finished. Chloe shifted near the sideboard. I hadn't looked, but I felt the lens rise, angling for the light on my chest. You rarely hear a camera. You feel its attention. Tonight, it felt like history asking for proof. Cameras clicked Chloe's phone, capturing it for posterity. The proofs that mattered never shouted. They waited stacked in manila folders no one bothered to touch, whispering in the quiet like ghosts sealed under paper. I stared at one on my desk, the coffee beside it turning cold, its steam long gone. The metal still glimmered in my memory, but Linda's mutter from the night before echoed louder. It means nothing without money. Her voice clung to me like smoke. The apartment around me was smaller than their guest bathroom walls, close and honest. No chandeliers, just the steady hum of a heater and the blue wash from my laptop. I had lived out of rucksacks heavier than this place, and yet the silence pressed harder than any desert. Tonight that silence felt like an ally wrapping close, as I sifted pages, each one heavy with stories they thought would remain hidden. The screen blinked with Caleb's name. First a text, hesitant, punctuated by ellipses. I think, "There's something you should see?" Then against habit he called. His voice came thin, as though afraid the walls around him were listening. "Alex, I don't agree with them. But I also can't fight them. Not openly." A pause, then words that shifted everything. "Some of Dad's files aren't what they seem." I leaned forward. "You're saying what I think you're saying." He exhaled hard. "Trust fund ledgers, property grants, money that was supposed to go elsewhere. Look for the filings from 2019. It's there. I can't send you everything, but I can point you." His breath caught, and then he ended the call, leaving only the static hum of my apartment. I turned to the folders I had dragged back from base storage records no one in the family thought I had a right to. Scans of deeds, grainy photocopies of tax returns, glossy annual reports full of smiles hiding rot. Each page another crack in the marble mask of their wealth. They spoke about futures at the dinner table, but the paper trail showed futures stolen, diverted, bent. Hours slipped. My eyes followed columns and signatures until numbers blurred. Then a figure leapt out, Ethan's name tied to an account meant for veteran support initiatives. Money earmarked to rebuild rehab centers funneled instead into his consultancy. The number was obscene enough to stop my breath. I leaned back, rubbing grit from my eyes. Linda's scoff, "Nothing without money," returned with cruel irony. If worth was defined by money, then what did it mean that their shine came from funds drained from men and women like me? Soldiers who bled in dust and silence, while Ethan deposited their hope into his pocket. The heater clicked. The coffee had gone bitter cold. I opened another folder, hand steadier than I expected. More transfers, more contradictions. The story repeating itself with the inevitability of marching boots. The family's pride had never rested on clean ground. It rested on the bones of people who had trusted too much, and on signatures that turned promises into personal gain. The files rustled like dry leaves, each one recalling voices of men I once carried out of blast zones, men whose futures these funds had promised to mend. Every receipt, every misfiled signature became a betrayal, sharper than shrapnel. I saw Ethan's grin across mahogany tables, Linda's toast to success, and beneath it the invisible cost. My chest tightened, not from rage alone, but from the weight of justice forming its own gravity. I knew then this was no longer about family rivalries or the bruises of old dinners. This was about the truth owed to people who had no seats at those polished tables. I whispered to the empty room, each syllable sharper than the scrape of a knife. So who's really broke now? Sometimes the smallest remark is a blade slipped under armor. At brunch the next morning, the oak-paneled dining room looked softer than it had at dinner. Sunbeams cutting through blinds, dust turning golden as it floated. Plates of eggs and ham were passed as if nothing had cracked open the night before, as though medals and muttered insults had evaporated with the candle smoke. Yet beneath the brightness, every glance still held residue, and my silence carried sharper weight than their laughter. Ethan leaned back in his chair, sunlight catching the edge of his cufflinks. His voice rang loud, always too eager to be overheard. Philanthropy is the cornerstone of legacy, he said, raising his orange juice like it was champagne. Our family has always given generously. Just last year, the donation drive for veterans. He paused, waiting for applause that never came. Well, you know how fast those funds made an impact. I was proud to facilitate. Linda smiled tightly, adding the polish he lacked. Yes, Ethan has been such a steward. The community notices when leadership extends beyond the boardroom. Her eyes slid toward me, daring me to contest it. I set down my fork, letting the pause stretch. Charity funds do travel fast, I said lightly, not looking directly at anyone. Sometimes straight to Porsche dealerships. The scrape of cutlery against plates froze. For a beat, the air thickened. Ethan's laugh came late and brittle, the sound of glass under pressure. That's not exactly how it works, Alex. He coughed into his napkin, but color had risen high in his cheeks. Rick's eyes shifted, brow tightening, as though a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on Ethan longer than comfort allowed. Linda tried to redirect. Alex, really, there's no need for sarcasm. You don't understand the intricacies of finance. I only shrugged. True. All I understand is the line between what belongs to veterans and what doesn't. Ethan snapped quicker than I expected. It wasn't theft. It was... He caught himself, words hanging like broken glass in the air. He cleared his throat again, softer this time, almost pleading. Reallocation. Everyone benefits eventually. The silence that followed felt engineered, like a boardroom suddenly short-circuited. The only sound was Chloe's phone sliding quietly across the table, camera angled just enough to catch Ethan's face. Her reflection in the screen showed half a grin, half defiance. Rick finally shifted in his seat, voice low but deliberate. Funny thing, son. Only guilty men rush to defend what no one accused them of. Ethan stared down at his plate, fork stabbing at eggs that had long gone cold. The boast from minutes earlier had curdled, and though Linda reached for his arm, her hand hovered without landing, as if afraid to burn herself on the heat of his mistake. I leaned back, satisfied with silence. This was not victory, not yet, just the first incision, small, but enough to let the air out of Ethan's certainty. My words had not shouted. They had whispered, cutting beneath layers he thought impenetrable. Chloe tapped her phone, tucking it under the table. Evidence archived. I caught her eye across the plates. She didn't speak, but in her glance was the understanding that cameras could wound sharper than knives, and sometimes truth was not shouted in tribunals, but caught in pixels at the right second. The blinds rattled as a draft moved through the room. Plates shifted. I let the quiet carry me, unhurried, knowing the real battle had just begun. Cliffhanger's silence lingered, heavy and unspoken. For the first time, Ethan looked smaller than the role he played. Paper wasn't paper anymore. It was a battlefield where every signature was a bullet. The winter wind bit at my neck as I pushed through the glass doors of the law firm downtown. Snowmelt dripped from coats onto polished marble floors. The receptionist barely looked up before motioning me toward the oak-paneled conference room where the fight had already been staged. Linda sat at the head of the table, posture sharp as if the chair had been molded around her spine. Ethan lounged at her right, his cufflinks catching the fluorescent light. Across from them, a man in a slate suit shuffled a stack of documents with careful precision, the family attorney rehearsed in neutrality. The air smelled faintly of ink and leather, but underneath it tension brewed like static before lightning. I took my seat alone. No allies, no entourage, just me against blood and paper. The attorney cleared his throat. We are convened to review amendments to the Carter Family Trust. Mrs. Carter has requested a revision regarding beneficiary allocations. His words were smooth rehearsed, but his eyes flickered uneasily as he glanced from Linda to me. Linda wasted no time. It's simple, she said, sliding a fresh stack forward. Alex has chosen a path that doesn't align with the family's vision. This amendment will reallocate his portion to Ethan and Caleb, who are building futures with tangible returns. The word tangible landed like a slap. I let the silence sit, the scratch of a fountain pen filling the void as the clerk noted proceedings. Ethan smirked. No offense, brother, but metals don't pay mortgages. I met his eyes steadily, saying nothing. Instead, I reached for the amendment. My hands were steady as I scanned the lines. The ink was clean, the clauses sharp. Erasure disguised as professionalism. I'll need a copy, I said quietly. The attorney hesitated. Linda bristled. Copies aren't necessary at this stage. I leaned back. On the contrary, transparency is always necessary when you're rewriting bloodlines. The attorney's jaw tightened. Legally, Mr. Carter is entitled to review before consenting. I'll provide one. His voice carried the faintest crack, a fissure in the wall Linda had built. Her eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, I reached into my coat pocket. A small velvet case clicked open. I set my metal on the table, the ribbon spilling red across oak, its gleam defying the sterile light above. Erase me on paper, I said, voice low, but steady. But you can't erase history. The nation calls this distinguished, and no amendment changes that. The metal sat between us like a silent witness. Even Ethan leaned back, cufflinks forgotten, as though the air itself had shifted. For the first time, Linda faltered. Her lips parted, words failing to form. The attorney's pen stilled mid-scratch. The room had turned not in noise but in weight. A clerk stepped in to collect signatures but paused, sensing the uneasy eyes darting from metal to amendment. Finally, the attorney muttered under his breath, half to himself. This could backfire. His voice was not meant for me, but it carried. Linda's glare snapped toward him, sharp enough to cut. Ethan fidgeted, tapping his cufflink against the desk. I slid the metal back into its case, stood, and buttoned my coat. No declaration, no grand exit. Just the quiet reminder that some legacies weren't built on paper trails, but on actions etched into history. As I walked out, the clerk's pen, scratched again, hurried as though capturing not just amendments but the fault lines that had just cracked open. The snow outside felt warmer than the conference room I left behind. The battlefield had only just been drawn. Even steel bends when heat's right, but I'd learned how to forge myself back. Rain bands drummed my window like a training cadence, and the apartment answered with the thin hum of the fridge and the tick of a stubborn clock. My inbox glared, retainer invoices, a letter from the trust attorney threatening immediate consequences, and 3 red banners about suspended access to accounts that had never truly been mine. The metal on the shelf looked heavier in this light. It pulled at the air the way a storm pulls at trees. I sat there and wondered for the first honest minute in months if the room would feel lighter without me in it. Silence tried to make offers. Silence said, concede, apologize, make it easy. I stared back until silence blinked first. I reached for the folders anyway. Ledger printouts, the Porsche-sized euphemisms, Ethan's name where veteran funds should have lived, and the paper rasped like dry grass under boot heels. Proofs, not speeches. A knock cut through the rain. I opened the door to Caleb Collar, wet eyes scouting the hallway like he expected the family crest to appear on a warrant. He stepped inside, dripping politeness onto the mat, and didn't sit. They escalated, he said. Mom met Ethan again. Kitchen talk, no phones. I was supposed to set up the printer and leave. He swallowed. I didn't leave. What did you hear? They're cutting you out of everything, he said, words small and careful, as if large ones might trigger alarms. Trust distributions, Dad's pension tie-ins, even the Arlington mortgage guarantee. Ethan thinks he buried the siphons so deep you'll drown before you find air. He rubbed his thumb along his palm, a habit from childhood. I recorded part of it. Not perfect. Enough to show intent. He glanced at the metal. I know I should have told you sooner. I waved toward the chair. He didn't sit. The rain pitched higher, then softened like doubt, breathing in and out. I opened my laptop. The screen lifted me in cold light. Chloe's name pulsed in the corner, a message waiting. I tapped. A video filled the display, angled and secret, the lens hiding under linen. Rick's whisper came first, strained, a man measuring the cost of a step he couldn't unstep. Linda. This could ruin us if it comes out. Maybe we've gone too far. The camera trembled. A shadow crossed the cloth. Linda's reply was a razor drawn slow. He's weak. He won't fight. The clip ended on the hush of silverware. The apartment shrank and widened all at once. I felt the old pressure in my ribs, that battlefield squeeze when you are between the map and the dust, one telling you to hold, the other begging you to move. Defeat walked to the edge of the rug and waited. It didn't cross. I thought of the ledger lines that curled like fuse wire. I thought of the metal's weight. I thought of the veterans whose names would never enter a newsletter. Then I heard my voice from somewhere steadier than my bones. If they want war, I'll bring truth. Caleb exhaled as if he'd been underwater. He pushed a folded paper across the desk, dates, initials, the skeleton of a scheme, his own quiet courage hiding between staples. I'll testify, he said. His knee bounced. I don't want to be them. For the first time all week, I allowed a breath that wasn't rationed. The room no longer bargained. The room agreed. I printed the video transcript, circled Linda's line, underlined Rick's wavering, and wrote one large word in the margin: receipts. The printer stuttered like distant rotor wash, and then obeyed. I packed a slim folder, the Chloe clip summary, Caleb's notes, the ledger paths that ran from charity account to Ethan's showroom smile. I added a blank page on top, the future space where their admissions would live. Outside, sirens braided with the weather. Inside, the heater exhaled like an old friend. I set the metal into its case, closed the lid, and placed the folder on top. History under proof. Proof under hand. Caleb finally sat. Do you think Rick will help? He's already helping, I said, tapping the screen where his doubt lived. He just hasn't told himself yet. Caleb nodded, eyes glassy with sleeplessness. He stood, then hesitated. If they ask, I found the files by accident. If they ask, I said, we'll already be in a room where accidents stop mattering. He left with the careful gait of a soldier who had never worn a uniform. The rain slowed to a patter. The clock kept stubborn time. My inbox pinged again. For a second, I let it ring the air like a small bell. I braced for another invoice, another threat, another knife made of polite stationery. I opened it anyway. The subject line was plain bureaucratic in a font that never raised its voice, and yet it cleaved the night cleaner than any gavel. Phone buzzes, court date set. Some truths hide in plain sight like ink that only shows under firelight. The library was nearly empty, humming under the fluorescent strips that made every file cabinet look like a witness box. Outside, the cold had pressed its hand against the glass, flattening the world into gray. Inside, the pages breathed dust, and I could almost hear them whisper, someone should have read us sooner. Caleb trailed behind me, his steps hesitant, his jacket damp from the drizzle we'd walked through. He clutched something in his fist, knuckles white. He hadn't spoken much on the way here, and I knew silence could mean either loyalty or betrayal. My pulse answered every step with its own question mark. We signed into the archives under the librarian's watch. She was a quiet woman, wire frames perched low, stamping the logbook with that rhythm of finality that sounded too close to a gavel. She glanced up at us, once curious, then slid the pen across the desk like a passing of judgment. Caleb signed slowly, each letter trembling as though his own name weighed too much. I led us to a long oak table under the buzzing lights. The stacks surrounded us like jury benches. Caleb finally opened his hand. A small flash drive rested there, black and nondescript, as plain as lint, except lint doesn't set families on fire. "This is it?" I asked. He nodded, throat tight. I copied them months ago. Didn't know why I kept them. Guess I do now. I slid the laptop closer. The librarian gave us a brief glance but said nothing. The drive clicked in, and suddenly the screen bloomed with folders, dates, initials, subject lines. I felt my breath slow, not out of calm, but precision. Every soldier knows this moment when the intel finally matches the fear. The first file played audio. Linda's voice sharp as broken glass. "The board will never ask. Redirect the funds. Veterans don't track numbers, they count coffins. We count balance sheets." Ethan's laugh followed, smug and too loud for the quiet library. Caleb's eyes darted toward me, then to the librarian across the room. She pretended not to listen, but the pause in her stamping betrayed her. She heard enough. That was good. A witness, however, unintended. Another folder opened: spreadsheets, account numbers, wire transfers. One entry bore a date that caught my chest. It was the same week my medal was awarded, when the nation had called me distinguished. While I was in a hospital ward, Linda and Ethan were siphoning donations meant for men who never came home. My service had bought them camouflage. I sat back, hands folded. The hum of the lights deepened, or maybe my ears were ringing with anger. Caleb shifted in his seat. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. But you need to see it." I leaned in close. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone they stole from. You've just handed me the ace card they never thought I had." We printed copies, quiet, deliberate, each sheet sliding onto the stack like ammunition. The librarian initialed the request forms, watching our faces. Her pen scratched truth into permanence. She would remember us. She would remember the date. When the last page cooled in my hands, I whispered what I knew to be true. "This ends in their own dining room or a courtroom." Caleb swallowed. "Both, maybe." The fluorescent hum grew steady again, like a drumbeat. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket, pressed the metal's case against it, feeling the two weights merge, proof and honor side by side, impossible to erase. And then I heard it faint and imagined echoing through the stacks. The sound of a gavel landing, once firm and final. It wasn't real. Not yet. But it would be. I had been silent long enough. This time I wanted them to choke on my truth. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and damp coats, a mixture of formality and fear. Rows of benches filled with strangers, reporters, and a few familiar faces pretending they had come for support. Flashbulbs from cameras lit the hallway before I entered each one, a reminder that this would no longer be contained to dining room whispers. My parents had always counted on shadows, on hushed tones behind closed doors. But today, the lights burned bright, and the echoes would carry farther than their control. I walked in with my lawyer at my side, the metal pinned discreetly beneath my jacket. It pressed against my chest, steadying my breath. Across the aisle sat Linda and Rick, both dressed in their sharpest clothes postures, stiff as if posture alone could rewrite what was already recorded in ink and audio. Ethan lounged 2 seats back, fiddling with his tie, arrogance draped over him like armor. Aunt Pat was there, too, hands clasped, eyes darting between me and them, as though she couldn't decide which future to root for. The judge entered his robe, swaying like the dark curtain before an act. He called the session to order. My lawyer stood first, laying out the context: a soldier whose name had been unlawfully erased from trust records, and the documents that suggested manipulation of charitable funds. I stayed seated watching. The courtroom was a theater, but today, the script was mine. Linda's lawyer tried to seize control. Your Honor, these accusations are absurd. This is nothing but resentment from a family member who feels entitled. The tone was smooth, but the sweat gathering at his temple betrayed cracks. Then came our turn. My lawyer opened a folder and slid the first page onto the projector screen. It glowed against the wall, a financial statement with two signatures that should never have been on the same line. One was legitimate, the other forged. The audience leaned forward. Even the reporters quieted their pens for a moment. Rick shifted uncomfortably. That there must be some mistake, he muttered. But mistakes don't explain matching timestamps and misaligned ink patterns. The forensic seal confirmed it. I lifted my chin. Mistakes don't repeat themselves in a pattern, I said quietly, but the microphone carried it across the room. Heads turned, pens scratched. Next came the emails. The room chilled as the screen filled with Linda's words projected larger than life. We need him erased. He brings nothing but a soldier's wage. Better to cut him out cleanly than watch him drain resources. Broke soldier. Dead weight. I didn't look at her while it played. I looked at the judge. His brow furrowed. Reporters' fingers rattled against keyboards. Chloe in the back row lifted her phone discreetly. For once, I welcomed her lens. Let the world see. Linda hissed to her lawyer. Shut it down, but the lawyer's eyes were already dropping. The evidence was too sharp, too direct. Rick tried to interject, voice cracking. It's taken out of context. But my lawyer countered swiftly. Context doesn't change intent. Their own words show they colluded to erase their child from rightful inheritance. Their own words reveal contempt for service that safeguarded the very system they exploit. I exhaled, fingers brushing the metal beneath my jacket. I didn't need to wave it like a flag. Its weight was enough. My truth was no longer a family argument. It was evidence under oath, alive in public record. The climax arrived not with my voice, but with silence. My lawyer pressed the final button, playing the audio clip Caleb had unearthed, Linda's voice ringing cold through the speakers. Erase him. He's nothing but broke. The sentence hung in the air. People stared at her. Not me. For the first time, they bore the shame. Their silence stretched a void louder than any insult they had ever thrown across a dinner table. And I thought, as the gavel echoed the call for recess, this is only the opening strike. But they already know they've lost the shadows. They thought I was done, but I hadn't played my ace yet. We turned the living room into an imitation courtroom: chairs, in rows, a coffee table crowded with folders and water glasses, the notary by the window, like a quiet sentinel. Uncle Henry, ally by blood and by bar card, sorted his brief with steady hands. Chloe hovered near the bookcase, her phone angled low. A silent lens can be the sharpest witness. Linda opened without invitation. This spectacle is unnecessary, she said, flicking her hand at the notary and Henry as if they were props. If Alex wanted reconciliation, he wouldn't have dragged in legal theater. No reporters, Henry said, mild as rain. Just witnesses. Rick folded his arms. Families don't handle disputes like this. You brought outsiders. I brought daylight, I said. Outsiders come with it. Linda's voice took on that lacquered calm I knew too well. My son is being manipulated. Whoever's feeding him these accusations has taught him to disrespect his parents. Henry said Mrs. Carter's statements here are being memorialized. She ignored it. This is a family home. We intend to keep it that way. You mean, keep it from me? I said. We mean, preserve it? Rick replied. I nodded to Henry. He slid me the small recorder. It looked harmless until it spoke. I pressed play. Linda's voice filled the room, clipped and certain. We keep the house. We cut him out. Rick lower. If this leaks, it ruins us. Ethan's chuckle. It won't. He's broke and obedient. Chloe's phone rose a fraction higher. Context, Henry asked. Rick stared at the rug. People vent. You can't. Private cruelty is still cruelty, I said. Private schemes are still schemes. The notary's stamp hissed on paper loud for something so small. This is theater, Linda snapped. You're turning relatives into jurors. You already did that, I said. I'm just giving them exhibits. Ethan tried on outrage. You recorded us. That's illegal. Henry didn't look at him. What's illegal is misdirecting charity funds and falsifying trust documents. I placed a folder on the table and left it closed. The folder wasn't the move. The room was. Silence drew the boundary lines. Arrogance furnished the bait. In my head, I saw the courthouse projector emails flaring into the record. You blame outsiders, I said, but every voice on that tape is yours. Linda laughed thinly. Of course you'd believe technology over love. I believe what leaves a trace, I said. Love that steals is just theft with better stationery. Henry waited for the hinge the instant a door stops resisting and swings open. Linda stepped through it. You want money? She spat. This has always been about money. No, I said. It's about how you valued me and what you were willing to do because of that valuation. She turned from me to the room, building a closing argument for a jury that had never asked to sit. We sacrificed. We built this house, this reputation. And he comes back from playing soldier and demands a share he hasn't earned. Playing soldier, Henry repeated. Rick tugged at her sleeve. Linda, he warned. I didn't move. The metal beneath my jacket lay cool as a coin. The ace wasn't in the folder or the recorder. The ace was pressure applied at the seam where pride meets fear. Let her write it herself. She obliged. Yes, we erased your name because you're nothing but a uniform with no money. No one breathed. The room widened to make space for the sentence. Henry reached for his pen. The notary looked up, hand-finding the seal by instinct. Rick pressed 2 fingers to his temple as if he could rub the sound back into silence. I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. I watched comprehension travel from ear to nerve to conscience, the cousins who'd applauded Ethan's promotions, the aunts who prized propriety over truth, the uncles who treated generosity like a tax strategy. The story had left my mouth. It now lived in theirs. Chloe lowered her phone very slowly as though a sudden movement might scare the moment away. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else, a curse. The stamp kissed paper again. It sounded like a door locking from the inside. Aunt Pat's hands trembled around a teacup. The cousins stopped pretending neutrality. The notary adjusted her glasses, waiting for the next word that would decide which form to stamp. Chloe's lens did not blink. Neither did I. We waited. Her words hung in the air like a verdict no judge could overturn. Their empire wasn't mine to save, it was theirs to lose. The morning after my mother confessed before witnesses, the building with the brass plaque smelled of toner and cold coffee. The notary's desk had been pulled into the conference room to seat suddenly careful relatives. Aunt Pat came with a folder marked Questions Cousins, queued for copies with seals, and Uncle Henry unhurried exact asked for ledgers, addenda maintenance records. Nobody said audit, but the air did. The stamp fell, dates frozen, signatures, acknowledged requests memorialized. The registrar confirmed a hold on the deed. A bank officer reported a freeze and a provisional review. I didn't celebrate. I watched. Collapse isn't a sound. It's a sequence. By noon, Linda and Rick were coaxed into the window seats. She wore a perfect coat. He wore the pallor of a man who planned for drizzle and met affront. Each time Henry asked for a document, Rick reached for a pocket that held nothing useful. Linda spoke less. When she did, the sentences came brittle. A cousin asked about the foundation's overhead. Another asked why transfers landed on holidays. Henry turned pages and let the questions find their exhibits. A bank rep arrived with notices. Accounts restricted. Internal review underway. Certified letters to follow. Linda tried to stand, then sat. Rick rubbed his ring. I took notes I didn't need. In the afternoon, we moved to the house. Blue tape marked postponed repairs. A box on the piano held expired insurance cards. The pantry drawer coughed up receipts for parties priced like semesters. Portraits watched like auditors. Relatives toured in a hush, visiting a museum of a dynasty that hadn't known it was over. Someone photographed the mission statement. Someone else found a second set of books, neater, thinner, lying to the thicker, messier ones. Ethan swaggered about temporary misunderstandings and inevitable win phrases that try to replace math. Chloe asked one question where the January donation landed. Ethan said, "The shelter." Henry produced the shelter's letter denying receipt. No one raised a voice. Silence did the arithmetic. By evening, neighbors noticed the cars and the migration of paper to the dining table. Linda closed curtains the son had already abandoned. Henry drafted a preservation letter. Chloe inventoried the hardware. I listened to the house refrain from falling. The knock at dusk was soft, professional. A man in a dark jacket carried 2 envelopes, polite cruelty printed on the front. He verified names and faces and set them on the hall table like place cards for a dinner nobody wanted. Linda's hands shook. Rick hovered as if proximity could dilute ink. Outside, the last light left. I didn't open the envelopes. Henry read the captions aloud: supplemental summons, date and time, mandatory appearance, potential charges, fraud conversion, charitable misappropriation. The notary from the morning, now off duty and human, again dabbed at her eyes. An aunt whispered this couldn't be happening to our family, then corrected herself and went quiet. In the study, a locked drawer yielded one final ledger, the kind that pretends to be a diary. Henry photographed every page. Linda asked whether the metal on my chest felt heavy. I told her weight and meaning aren't the same unit. Rick asked if there was a way to make the reporters go away. I told him truth doesn't negotiate with optics. A cousin asked if I wanted tea. I said yes, because kindness must be permitted to survive. In the hallway, the envelopes waited for comprehension. Ethan vanished into his car to call someone who no longer picked up. The furnace clicked. Outside, the cold prepared its nightly prosecution. I sat on the bottom stair where I once tied my shoes and looked at nothing until nothing looked back. The house didn't ask for absolution. It asked to be quieter than the people who used it as a stage. They looked at me searching for mercy, but I had none left to give. Justice doesn't erase scars, but it teaches you where to stop bleeding. The words came to me as I watched the winter light stretch itself thin across Grant Park. The air carried a knife's edge of cold, each breath turning into a fog that hovered and then drifted away. The city's noise softened under the snow sirens, muted footsteps padded. For once, Chicago wasn't a battlefield of lawyers' summons and questions. It was just a park, a bench, and a silence waiting to be filled. I sat with my gloves off, metal hidden under my coat, the steel close enough to remind me that memory can weigh as much as metal. I didn't expect her to come. My sister had been the quiet figure in the background since that first night, the one who neither mocked nor defended, whose silence sometimes stung sharper than Linda's insults. But today she appeared at the end of the path, scarf wound high, hesitation in every step. She stopped before me, uncertain, as though I might dismiss her the way I had been dismissed for years. But I didn't move. I waited. She lowered herself onto the bench, shoulders drawn in against the cold. For a while, neither of us spoke. The wind moved branches, the snow creaked beneath passing joggers, and we sat there like two people stranded on an island of memory. Finally, her voice cracked open the quiet. I should have spoken up. That night at the table when they called you broke useless. I said nothing, and silence is the same as siding with them. I looked at her. really looked and found no malice, only guilt worn down into exhaustion. My first instinct was to shrug it off, pretend it hadn't mattered, but honesty had become the sharpest weapon I owned. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to say I wasn't alone. Not for money, not for inheritance. Just one word that I mattered beyond the uniform. That's all I wanted. She pulled her scarf tighter, eyes glistening from more than the wind. I was scared. They cut people down when they resist. I thought if I stayed quiet, maybe I could protect what little space I had. I nodded. I understand. I used to think obedience kept you safe. Then I learned it just keeps you invisible. Her gloved hand reached for mine, tentative like an apology testing its ground. I don't want to be invisible anymore. And I don't want you to think I see you as nothing but that metal. I touched the hidden weight under my coat. The metal isn't about me. It's proof that in the moment it counted, I lived by what I claimed to value. It's not money, not land, not trust funds. It's the evidence that I didn't betray myself. She drew a slow breath. Then let me walk beside you now. When the sentencing comes, I'll be there. You shouldn't stand in that room alone. Something shifted in me like ice cracking under sunlight. For months, I had stood alone, every word a defense, every action an answer to doubt. But now, the possibility of shared ground appeared, not forgiveness of the past, but acknowledgement of the present. For the first time, I said quietly, almost to myself, I won't be walking alone. The cold didn't feel as sharp anymore. The scars were still there, etched deep, but she had reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Scars are not open wounds, they are healed reminders. And sometimes healing means letting someone else walk beside you, even if they arrive late. They once erased me with words, now the law carved my name in stone. December pressed its chill against the courthouse glass, frosting the morning like breath on a mirror. Reporters bracketed the corridor with tripods. Tally lights blinked. Inside pews were full. Coats whispered. The seal glinted with an authority older than anyone here. I touched the metal under my jacket, not to display it, not yet, but to steady the bone beneath. My sister slid beside me and didn't speak. Her shoulder said enough. The judge read findings in a voice that needed no amplification, falsified statements, misdirection of designated charitable funds, intentional interference with a trust instrument. Remedies followed like turning hinges. The trust was reinstated with my name restored, an independent fiduciary appointed, restitution ordered to veterans organizations treated as rounding errors, then sentences probation with strict conditions for Rick. Confinement for Linda partly stayed to allow restitution and compliance. Evidence once rumor, now war, the court's livery, emails, ledgers, transfers, the recording where contempt mistook itself for privacy. The judge paused. This court rejects the notion that service confers less standing than wealth. Pen scratched. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my sister's hand found mine and pressed. We stood when told to stand. Practicalities broke over us in orderly waves, calendars for compliance, receivership instructions, narrow windows of appeal. Linda looked smaller, not by posture, but by scale, as if the room had finally reached its true size and left her at hers. Rick met my eyes for a beat, searching for air. I had none to spare. What I had given proof, patience, restraint, was already more than any ledger would show. Outside the steps were a shallow mountain. Flashbulbs cracked like brittle ice. The metal caught a sliver of sun and woke a bright reply to months of shadow. Microphones leaned in. I didn't climb the makeshift podium. I stopped halfway, my sister on my left, and faced the crowd that came to convert a family's failure into a headline. They called me a broke soldier. But today, the metal speaks louder than they ever could. Questions flew. What will you do with your restored share? Will you reconcile? Will you sue? But they landed soft, cushioned by snow, and the fact that the record already spoke. I said the first disbursement would go to the same organizations my parents had treated as convenient fiction. The rest of what I had to say would live in the work I did tomorrow and the day after. There was no victory dance. Victory had already been entered into the minutes. We left the cameras and crossed the plaza. December light turned the air crystalline. Even the traffic seemed to move with care. A vendor poured coffee into paper cups, steam rising like a white flag. We took two and stood facing the steps until the crowd thinned. The wind steadied us. I thought of sand and flashes and all the ways light can cut sun off a rotor blade noon through a windshield's strobes ricocheting across marble. In every glare, I learned the same lesson: look where you're going, not at what tries to blind you. The light steadied us. I touched the metal once more, then let the coat fall over it. It didn't need an audience. It needed a purpose. And it had one. My sister threaded her arm through mine and matched my pace. And as the gavel fell, I knew this was only the beginning of my own legacy. I want to turn to you, the ones listening, the ones who walked with me through betrayal, courtroom walls, and cold December mornings. If my story means anything, let it remind you that silence can be power, that patience can break chains louder than anger. Support me not because I won, but because I stood firm when others tried to erase me. Leave your thoughts. Tell me where you saw your own struggles reflected. Tell me if my fight gave you courage. And carry this with you when someone calls you less. Let your truth, not their insult, define you.